Welcome back to this week's episode of Promising Young Surgeon. As always, I'm your host, Dr. Frances Mei Hardin, and I am so excited to introduce our guests today to talk about a topic, really very close to my heart, and I think close to a lot of our hearts, which is basically how to have a life outside of healthcare or outside of your job, outside of the resident grind. And so I am going to introduce our guests, Chris and Hannah. Hannah is a fourth-year Obgyn resident at Tower Health Reading Hospital, and Chris is a VP of marketing in the B2B SaaS industry. Together, they're the co-founders of Otherside Med, a community specifically focused on supporting families in medicine. Aside from their careers, they're also parents, entrepreneurs, travel enthusiasts, real estate investors, and community builders. But most importantly, they're people who want their love to be easy to see. In a time and place where our work can make us jaded, complacent, and alone, they want their love for each other and love for those around them to make an impact. Thank you both for joining me today.
Yeah, we're really excited to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Well, of course, and I've said this to you guys, but, so everyone's on the same page. I really love your content. I first discovered you on Instagram, and every time I come across, medical or medical adjacent creators who are really saying things that are outside the box, I love that. I think that makes me feel like the culture is moving in the right direction.
Yeah. I think that's a really big thing. I think when we first kind of were talking about how to develop Otherside Med and the things we were super passionate about, I think it really was just trying to highlight the good things about medicine. I think so often in residency, we kind of get bogged down and overwhelmed with the kind of day-to-day grind that sometimes I think we actually miss out on the good parts of residency that we wouldn't actually realize if we didn't take a second to just stop and kind of look around us. And so I think for us, we had to learn this the hard way. We started as, interns and kind of didn't really know what we were doing or how to find balance, and quickly got very burnt out with each other. And so we kind of had to sit down and say, okay, what are we going to do to make this different, because this is not sustainable. We can't do this for 4 years. And so I think when we tried to conscientiously find a balance was when we were actually much more happy. I enjoyed going to work. I wasn't as burnt out coming home. And we finally realized that there was way more good than we ever thought we would ever find. And I think that that's been the super fun part about it. We're actually enjoying it. It's not been something that I think we have felt super bogged down by.
That's incredible. And, you do sound kind of the least burnt out of every resident I've certainly talked to in the past couple months here. And so I do think that clearly there's really something to what you're saying. And I do want to, for all of our listeners, if they haven't yet gotten to check out a lot of your videos and some of this messaging, it's so funny because we do have listeners who are in medicine and we have listeners outside of medicine. So when I quote unquote call this, out of the box, cool messaging, I want to clarify that I really just am referring to the fact that I've seen you guys talk about how you didn't let residency stop you from having a kid and growing your family. You don't think that residency should stop people from still prioritizing and investing in their relationships, their marriages. I love all of that. And it's so funny because our non-medicine people, of course, they'll be like, I don't know how avant-garde that sounds to me. They'll be like, that sounds pretty reasonable. You're not, it's not earth-shattering, but I do think that especially for surgeons, like yourself, Hannah, I do think it's a little shattering. We don't see that modeled for us necessarily very much.
And I think that's part of what I had to learn the hard way. As Hannah just kind of alluded to, of coming into the very first few years of residency, there's a huge isolation piece that I had to adapt to, not only because we picked up our life and moved to a new state and moved hours and hours away from our families, but I work remotely. And so in the software space, I work from home and don't have many friends locally. And so it's if I don't have a reason to get out of the house, I can be buried in the home for a week on end and never leave. And so early on, that was something that I had to learn. And then I'm like, okay, I know I can't be alone in this journey. There are other partners in medicine that have to be non-medical who are navigating the same challenges I am. How can we share those? How can we highlight that? How can we fix that? How can we share sort of part of our story that illuminates kind of what we're both going through? which kind of then feeds into the content that we're then creating. So it's not just, hey, I'm a surgeon, I'm an influencer.
Mm-hmm.
No, we're just a family in medicine trying to just show how we can create some normalcy on both the medical side and the non-medical side of family, marriage, relationships, careers.
Yeah, I think that was the biggest thing for us. When I first started residency, I had really wonderful mentors and was very lucky to have a lot of different male and female colleagues that I really looked up to. But I didn't really have someone that I felt like I could watch and say, oh, that person, look how well they're balancing X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, it was like, okay, well, residency has to be my entire life. And this is what I'm dedicating, all of my time and all of my energy to. And what I realized was that that is not sustainable. And for me to truly be good at my job, I had to find areas of my life that made me feel like me, so that when I went to work, I was able to be exactly who I needed to be for my patients, for my co-residents, for my attendings. And finding that balance and kind of prioritizing it, I think made me feel more purpose and more fulfillment with what I was doing at work than I ever had before.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, before we really dive deeply into the how of it all and, what tips you guys can share with us to be able to achieve that ourselves, I would love to hear first, going back to the beginning, to hear about how you guys first met and starting dating and everything like that pre-transition into residency.
Yeah. So I actually think that that's probably one of our most favorite stories.
Yeah.
I moved, I was in medical school in Virginia and had moved to kind of the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area for my medical school rotations as a third year. Knew absolutely no one, but just said, sure, I'm not married. I don't have kids. I'll move somewhere different for a year. And so got plugged in with a group of friends from a local church in that area. And one of them was mutual friends with Chris. So we had kind of met through mutual friends a couple times. At that initial time, I was dating someone else. And so it was just, oh, nice to meet you. You seem like a nice person, but have a nice life. We ended up running into each other consistently over the next couple months. Yeah. And I finally gained up the courage to put my phone number in his phone and kind of take the first
intrigue.
Yes. And just said, hey, if you ever want to use it, here it is.
Very bold.
I love that. Oh, yes. I got goosebumps.
Yes. To which he only responded with his name and nothing else for a month.
No, nice to meet you. No, had a great time tonight. I just said Chris Herring, which is
right,
terrible.
Chris.
So yes. So I feel like I left the door open for him to just hit this home run out of the park.
Yeah.
And it just, nothing happened. And so, I just kind of laughed it off and said, hey, you did something funny and spontaneous. But we ended up running into each other at a coffee shop where I would love to study and he would work on some of his work. And so I walked up to him and just said, when a girl gives you her number, she wants you to use it. And he said, well, I didn't want to have to use it because I wanted to ask you on a date in person, which of course I was a save. So good for him. So from that point on, we sat that night, talked for hours, and started dating a couple weeks later, got engaged that same year in September and got married February before match day in March. So things moved very fast. But it was one of those things, when we knew. And when we both kind of sat down and said, I point blank told him, I'm going to be an OBGYN. That's what I want to do with the rest of my life. This is what my life's going to look like. This is what residency is going to look like. Take it or leave it. But this is what I'm going to do. You can come and join if you want. And he, from the very beginning, has just jumped right in. And I think that that's made the transition and everything really fun and exciting because things have moved fast, but we've kind of always known what we wanted and kind of the direction we were going. But yes, our families were a little bit like, are you sure this is very, very quick? But as soon as they met each of our families, respectively, they were like, oh yeah, this is definitely it. You have our full support. So it was super fun.
Well, I literally love it. I would watch the rom-com. I would watch the film version. I would watch it as a Netflix short series. Like, give me more of this kind of stuff. I love rom-coms, and I think that that's very sweet. I also really, of course, I gotta applaud Hannah extra because, like, fortunately, she has some game. If she didn't, like, I don't know that we'd all be here this evening.
Yeah.
Well, we have very different ways of telling the story because I have every reason of why I was a little bit more patient along the way.
You were calculating the whole time.
Well, in short, I mean, she says we met through mutual friends. We did, but we also met at a bar. She left that part out. So we met at a bar, and that's where I learned that she had a boyfriend. And so even though we kept running into each other, I was trying to be respectful. You know, I wasn't trying to step on someone else's toes. I wasn't trying to break up a relationship, nor did I want to be a rebound. And so knowing when she got out of a relationship that I was like, hey, this is an incredible girl, but like, we probably need some time to figure out what's going on there. And then I was also in the process of finishing up graduate school, thinking about moving back to Seattle, Washington. I was like, do I want to be tied into a relationship where I'm not sure what my life's going to look like? So I had a lot going on internally that just led me to say, maybe we just need to put a pause or just like slowly move into this friendship or relationship. And then she's like, just take me on a damn date, you know, like this is basically what we were going for.
I gotcha.
Where it hit it off, and I just quickly knew that this was an incredible woman that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. So the rom-com is still there. We just have very different sides of how we approach it.
I think my side is a little bit more rom-commy though.
Yeah.
Well, yours is more cinematic for sure. You got to play up the tension and things like that. But that is very sweet. I appreciate you walking us through your thought process, Chris. Like, we got to give you some credit as well. That's sweet. You know, we like a respectful guy in this scenario. But I will say, like, I can relate to the quickness of it, the when you know, you know. My husband and I met in September of my 4th year of medical school. I was actually on an away rotation.
Yeah.
And we met at a bar.
Nice.
So, you know, I told him, oh, you know, we went on a couple dates, and then I was like, oh, I don't live in this town. I'm going back to medical school. Like, I don't even live in this state.
Right.
And he was like, oh, well, you know, that was me saying that in response to him saying after a few dates, you know, I really like you. Mm-hmm. And I said, that's a very nice sentiment. Again, don't live here. Sorry for the surprise. Like, I don't feel like I have to disclose that on date 1 or 2. But I was like, I'll tell you now. Yeah, I don't go here. I don't live here. I had said, you know, I was rotating at this hospital, but he didn't know anyone in medicine, didn't know any med students or surgeons or anything like that. But we dated long distance. We matched together, you know, that March. He was like, I'll just go wherever you match. Like, I want to do this with you. And yeah, we've been together ever since. So I think that I can really relate to that, like, 4th year of medical school timeline. And even when I graduated from residency, my 5th chief year, I remember one of the attendings, as I was like about to finish and graduate, they were like, that's crazy. They were like, you and Colin, I didn't think you'd make it. But there you go. Because we had been dating, to be fair, we'd been dating like, you know, 8 months when we moved there together. And we were like, what's up? It's us. Yeah, we signed a lease together. I mean, you know, but when you know, I think.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
That's a really cool story that you can definitely understand the craze and just the untraditional ways that you kind of jump in and the same way that I did for Hannah, that Colin did for you, and just say, hey, sign me up. I'm ready to rock. And you just kind of pivot and you learn through the process of it. But it worked out for us both, clearly. So
totally. I mean, I do think it takes like such a special, adaptable person to play that role where you're not in medicine. I mean, here's what's crazy is I think even for myself as the person in medicine, and I wanted this for so long and I prepped for ENT for so long, I still didn't get what it would take. And I didn't have, I think, a perfect idea of like what residency would be like. So if I couldn't even wrap my mind around it with all these years of prep and like diligent work and knowing ENTs and things like that, then how could he? Like, having no having a lot of business experience and then none in the healthcare industry.
Yeah, I completely.
I don't know if you felt that way.
I was going to say, I definitely feel like that was something that was a pretty steep learning curve for me at first. It was, I have done all these OBGYN rotations. I spent most of my 4th year traveling to different states and having attendings treat me like I was a resident. But until you're actually the one who's standing there holding a scalpel and doing the procedure and getting the page in the middle of the night and taking call shifts and doing those things, it just hits different. And I think the level of responsibility that you carry, even though you may be working similar hours, at times as to what you were expected to do as a medical student. The just level of responsibility is just something that you feel differently. And so I feel like that mental and kind of, psychological almost pressure that you feel at times can really be a lot. And I think that that's something that is hard to prep for. You don't really know what it's going to feel like until you're in that moment and you have that scenario. I was the same way. I feel like I had, really done all of my research outside of things. I had talked to tons of mentors. I had gone to tons of conferences to kind of figure out exactly how to be the best resident. And it doesn't really hit you until you're doing it and you're taking the calls and, doing everything before it kind of sets in.
Yeah, I really identify with that. I totally agree with you. Because as a med student, I mean, it's a stressful time. Absolutely, because med students are working as hard as they can. They kind of get a little bit of the arrival fallacy. It's like, I'll work really hard, but then all my dreams will have come true when I get into residency. Yeah. And it's like, oh man, okay, you're in for a ride if you think that that's the arrival. But as a medical student, I for sure, I took a lot of buddy airway call. I never was like, okay, somebody's wellness or health or life will be on the line based on my response as the med student. And as an intern even, we didn't take first airway call or anything like that. So I think that I started to feel it PGY 2 year, which is when we're first call for these emergent airways. But even then you're kind of like, I could I can phone a senior. And I think when we became seniors ourselves, 4th and 5th year ENT residents, then it did start to feel like, okay, this person's life, this is on me. And I'm a couple years into my attending practice because at every stage I think, okay, this is it. And and this should be hopefully the most of the psychological weight of this. Guess what? I had no idea that becoming an attending, nobody to call, no safety net. I'm in solo practice. So it really is like my brain and my hands. That is like a whole other hurdle that I had to learn.
Yeah, I feel like I felt that chief year as well. Just because when we started this year, it's definitely different. You're kind of the end all for all of the residents and you're sitting at the chair at the end of the row now. And you're used to being able to lean over and look and see other residents. And now you are that resident and you're, serving as kind of the acting attending for a lot of the, residency clinic cases and things like that. And, but I think in the same way, I found it to be very helpful to kind of help me take more ownership of things, because I think in residency, sometimes it's easy to kind of become a little bit complacent and say, oh, well, that's a private attending patient or whatever. So ultimately they're going to be the ones that make the final decisions. But I think trying to take a lot of ownership and say yes, this is our patient. So how are we going to take care of this patient together? How am I going to approach their care? What am I going to do? And I found that to be even more helpful as a chief now to kind of change the mindset that my lower year residents have to be how am I communicating that to other attendings, to other residents? How am I communicating it to the patient that I am really part of their care team? But man, it hits different when you're the one who's well, what do you want to do? Do you want a sectioner? And you're like, yeah, I do. But knowing that you're the one who can make that call is pretty scary at times.
Totally. Chris, on your end, as she has moved up this ladder of responsibility and yes, the psychological pressure of it all, how have things changed for you?
Yeah, there's a different level of understanding that I think I try to be aware of when she comes home, right? Because I'm well aware that regardless of the year, there's always stress, but the stress I felt has just continued to grow as the responsibilities have grown. And so I think out of my own selfishness, it can be easy just to be hey, you're home. Let's do all things that are home life without the actual understanding that she may need to decompress on some things. She just may need to go for a run. She may need to go off for a spin or do something totally by herself for a bit. She may not want to talk at all. And that's totally okay before I just word vomit everything about my day and everything that I want to do or whatever we can do together. And as she's gone into chief year, the responsibilities have definitely grown. The ownership has definitely increased, and the pressure that she's been under has also been an added layer to our relationship of how do I know her, love her, and care for her as she comes home when things do look different and patient outcomes aren't what you would hope they would be. And you do deal with loss, or you do deal with you get all the oncology side of things too, where you just can't win, right? There's so many different aspects to what she does that I've had to learn that coming home doesn't mean that it's always gonna be rainbows and butterflies. It is for me because I get my wife back, but still, like, knowing that there's a lot of conversations, there's a lot of weight that can still be a part of what she's carrying with her has been something I've had to learn to just kind of like feel out. And so it's a question that we just ask every day. Is just on a scale 1 to 10, how is today? And then she gives me a number and I'm like, that's awesome. Do you want to talk about it? And that helps me know, hey, if it's a 10, like, and she goes, yeah. And then if it's like, hey, it's a 2, now I really don't want to talk about it. I'm like, great. We're going to put work in a drawer and close it and just move on and just kind of like focus on other things in our life right now. And that's just kind of been a helpful test for at least me to be able to gauge of, you know, where's she at? How can I help? And what can I do to kind of lift the spirits when things need lifted?
That's great. That's such a good tip. Well, wait, and when did you guys start implementing that? Like what year?
It was about second year, I thought.
Yeah. Intern year was rough for us.
Rough on our marriage, rough on
I think it was just kind of rough all around. I think we really were still trying to isolate independently because we had obviously just gotten married right before residency started. We're also learning how to live in a new place. We're learning how to live without family or friends or really any kind of support network around. We're having to kind of figure out, like, how do we navigate that when life is also very stressful?
Yeah.
We got a dog because, you know, what else do you do when you have busy schedules except for get a puppy? So it was just a lot of change all at once. And so I think I remember vividly us just sitting down one day and being like, what are we doing? Like, life is just kind of passing by and we're just kind of passing each other. Mm-hmm. And so, like, how are we actually going to make this work to where this is sustainable? This is enjoyable. This is
the marriage we wanted
something
to be,
that we're doing together versus it being, I'm doing residency and you're doing your VP thing. And like, great if it all works out. But how do we actually do it together? Like, I've learned way more SaaS terms than I ever thought I ever would, but it's because like I'm genuinely interested in it. I know what all of these acronyms stand for that I never thought. And same thing with Chris. Like, Chris has watched videos of C-sections and surgeries that he probably never thought he would ever watch because it helps me study and he's interested in showing me that, like, hey, I think that's really cool. So when we finally kind of had that conversation, it was like, okay, we're going to be very intentional to like communicate how our days are so that we can figure out a way to actually make this work. And so second year, when we started implementing that question, it felt so good because it really took the pressure off of me of being like, I have been peopled all day long. I have talked to people and nurses and attendings and patients all day. And the last thing I wanted to do on some days was come home and feel like I had to spill everything that had happened or what I was feeling. And so for him to say, hey, how was your day on a scale of 1 to 10? And me be like a 1. And then him say, do you want to talk about it? And me be able to confidently say no, and it be a totally okay response, I think was a huge game changer for us.
Yeah. I think that, and then the secondly would be like just learning how to make decisions for us. Because I think earlier, both in our marriage, but also just throughout residency, I would always want her feedback on, like, in a way to serve her. It's like, you've been working so hard and I work hard too, but my work isn't life or death, you know? So like, I put that in a very different kind of space where I feel like just being able to make sure that she gets the food that she wants, or she wants to, whatever the little things that they may be, that I'm just like, what do you want? And not realizing that that's just one more decision that she has to make. So sometimes just learning that, like, hey, the best thing I can do is just make a decision for us.
Yeah, decision fatigue is very real.
Yeah, exactly. And so I had to learn that. And that was a whole part of that early stage of residency where it's like, yes, we can communicate and we always want to communicate well, but there are things that I can just cover and do. And it's like, hey, do you want to pay the bills this month or do I? Like, no, I'll just do it. You know, I don't need to ask, do you want to be the one to log in and do it? It's like, I can just knock it out and just let her know so that it's one less thing that she has to think about. Stuff like that was just helpful for us as we've grown over the last few years.
It's very moving to listen to. You know, I appreciate you sharing that because, and I will tell you guys, you know, I feel like I can feel how intentional you are with your communication with each other and kind of how you set up your life to make it conducive to this really, like intimate, lasting, fulfilling relationship. I think that that's incredible. One part to that question that I love. So you guys implemented that in second year. And so when you got home, Hannah, it's yes, rate the day. And then do you want to talk about it? And I feel like that also kind of knocks out and it starts to address this like third question that I think a lot of us struggle with, which is, do you want to fix it? Do you want me to fix it? Do you want me to give you advice? Yes or no? Like, I feel like Colin and I have our own version of kind of those questions. Because yes, sometimes it's like, I want to just very quickly vent or complain about something. I don't even really need feedback or like advice because I'm not trying to fix it, right? Versus those times when I come to him and I say, hey, I do want your advice. I am thinking through, I'm kicking around a couple different ways to handle this scenario, very different things. But I think that to the partner, they can feel the same because it's like, your spouse brings to you a quandary of some kind, or just like, hey, this went down at the hospital. And it's very different to be like, okay, are we in problem solving mode or do you want to just tell a story?
Yeah. And Chris has said that before. He's like, is this like fixing mode or are we in conversation mode? Like, are you venting? Do we need to set a timer? Like, are we trying to create boundaries to be like, you have 5 minutes? And so I think just like actually trying to set expectations of like where the conversation in my brain needs to go is super helpful. But I think that that's like a huge thing, just like setting expectations with the conversation and then taking the pressure off to feel like you have to fix it. Like sometimes we literally just want to vent about how horrible our day was or like how frustrating something was that happened in the OR or whatever, and then just be done and be able to just completely move on and, eat dinner and go about our lives.
Yep. And one quick tip, something that worked for Colin and I, because I honestly often did feel that way. I would say that in my attending era, I'm much more like, that actually sounds great. I'm going to try this. I would like to give a number and then probably not talk about it. Because that's more been my approach and my practice these past few years. But as a resident, oh my gosh, every day, end of the workday, I was a bat out of hell. That's the best way to describe it. I would get in my car at the hospital at whatever crazy time, it's dark out. And I lived about 10 minutes away from the hospital. So the system we had was I call him when I get in the car. I have the full drive home to be a bat out of hell. Then when I get out of the car at home, it's in the box. It's compartmentalized. Like we're going to, we don't bring that crazy energy into the home, my crazy resident energy. And that way we can focus on dinner together, quality time together, whatever it may be. But what's funny too, to me, I love this. And I think this is such a good point because I know it's true for us, but I'm even hearing from you guys. I think that even a couple that's really strong, been doing this together for years, living together for years, it is still not always 100% obvious what the boundaries of the conversation are. Like, as in, am I bringing this to the table for it to be fixed or for me to vent? Like, I can't 100% read that in my partner. I don't think that he can see that all the time in me. And the best way for us to, and I think this really mature place and healthy place that we've gotten to is just to say our expectations. Like, I don't expect him to even know. I might even just show up and say, this is what I wanted out of this conversation. May I start? And then it's like, yes, 3 minutes of being a bat out of hell. And then I say, okay, that was nice. I'm going to put that back in its box.
Yeah. Well, and I think when you can frame it, and it doesn't mean to sound like we're very cookie cutter in the way that we talk, but I think if you can come in and just be like, Chris, I don't want you to solve this. I just want to be able to share. Because if she doesn't kind of preface with that, by default, I'm a problem solver. So the moment I hear something, well, have you thought about this, this, and this? And then she's just going to be like, shut up. I want to strangle you right now. That's not what I want to hear from you. Like, I just want you to listen to me. Or I just want to feel validated in the way that I feel or the frustrations that I'm experiencing, like whatever it may look like. And so I think it's totally valid to be able to just be like, I just want you to listen to how I'm feeling right now. And then we can be done with it. But it's important for me to get it out there. So I think what you just outlined is super helpful for those who are listening, but even for us as we even get better at our own communication. So.
Yeah, I feel like, because, as a self-proclaimed rom-com super fan, I think it's important for all of us to kind of see, like, yes, there's Disney, but then there is also real life, because there might be people out there who do expect their partner. They're like, hey, we've been together for years. That's crazy. You can't tell what my intentions are coming into X or Y or Z conversation. And it's like, honestly, no, I'm not sure that that's a realistic thing to ever expect out of somebody else, you know? And so, yes, communicating about intentions is so wonderful. But I would love to move on to just hearing about really how the other side of medicine started, like who brought it up first and what were the first steps towards like this little empire you guys have.
You want me to share? Ultimately, the idea came early in residency, but not as like a business model or any sort of way to like really help people. It was more of my own like cry out for help. Of just like, I know I can't be alone in this, but what am I to do about it? And by alone in this, meaning like, okay, I just got married. My now partner or my spouse is gone 80, 90 hours a week. I don't know what I'm doing here. Like, where is my place in all this? Where are there others like me that I can like learn from, hear some advice from, and just enjoy being around? So as we kind of alluded to, I mean, it's led to a lot of like hard conversations with our marriage. It's allowed us to both to seek out mentors. Allowed us both to talk about therapy and things like that are going to like be really helpful for us. But ultimately, it was fall of third year. Yeah, fall of third year when I was doing a lot of traveling for work, and I was driving. I remember coming back up to Philadelphia. I was by myself. I was with my son. I had my son in the back seat, and we were driving. She couldn't go on this trip with us. And I was just thinking of just different ways like that I could create. I mean, I've obviously being a marketer, I'm very familiar with building communities and a software space of salespeople and marketers and revenue operations people. I was like, what communities are out there for med spouses? And as I started looking up at these things, I'm like, there wasn't a whole lot that I found. There were a few, but the ones that were existing, at least the ones that I found, were associated with like the ACGME or with ACOG or with ACOOG or different like affiliates that had various agendas that were attached. So I'm like, I don't even want to be attached to anything. I just want to be able to have a support, like offer some kind of support group or be a part of something that would be a place that, you know, I felt like heard and felt seen and felt like I could share some of the things that we've gone through and help others along the way. Ultimately didn't see it. And that's when I just came home and finally that night, I remember his like, hey, I got an idea. What do you think of this? She's like, I think it's genius. I think it's great. Like, I think you should do it. I think we should do it. And that's how like the idea started at a place of just, I'm wanting some help, but I also think that there are others who could benefit from finding like that similar shared experiences.
And so for us, when it really started, it was like, how do we make this like actually applicable to like our immediate community that we have around us? So how do we reach out to other residency programs within our own hospital system? You know, we hosted an event where we invited all the residents and just said, hey, there's a local park. If anybody wants to come, like just meet other people in the different residencies who live in the same town and work at the same hospital as you, show up.
Bring your partners, bring your kids, bring whoever you want. Like,
and so I think, you know, in our own program, it's like, hey, who are all the partners and spouses or kids or extended family members? I mean, we've had people's moms and grandmas come to our house for meals and things like that, because it's like, we just wanted to open up our home to be like, this is a place where anyone and everyone can come in and feel like they're going to get loved on, get a good meal, and feel like they have somebody that's in their corner. And so it was like, how do we take this kind of micro environment that we're trying to create with the direct people around us, and how do we kind of extend that to kind of something that's a little bit bigger and greater? And so I think the biggest thing for us was, how do we create that socially using social media to kind of say, okay, let's highlight some of the things that make us different, but are ways that other people want to be different too. Like, let's highlight some of the differences in like what a partner of a spouse may feel. What about what the spouse is feeling when they go to work and they're having to leave family and friends behind? So highlighting all of those things, I think, has really created kind of this unified vision of like, it doesn't have to be that cookie cutter kind of mold that we so, frequently have to feel like we need to fit into in medicine. Like it can be different.
Yeah.
We can do multiple things. And we can do them well. And you don't have to give up one in order to achieve the other, and vice versa. It's just going to look different.
Yeah.
My residency career as a wife and as a mother is going to look very different than some of my friends who work in other, in other avenues and work arenas. That may mean that I have different people in my support network, like a nanny or, family and friends that have to sometimes pivot and be emergency childcare. But that's what it looks like, because for us, it was really important to still have a family. And so I think being able to kind of take that microenvironment first and then kind of say like what at our core makes us us, and then how do we expand that to kind of make other people feel like, hey, I look like them. I have similar goals and aspirations to what they're doing. And like, I want to do the same thing. How can we all do it together? I think it's been super fun.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And again, I mean, I admire how intentional you guys are. Because again, like as a consumer of your content, I do feel like you have distilled out those universal themes that you're talking about very well in this way that, yeah, it translates, broadly on social media. And this idea of even connecting residents across one institution in different departments, different programs, let alone the crazy idea of connecting residents in a city, like across multiple institutions.
Right.
There's been a lot of, I've seen talk about that over the years as like, would that be a good idea if we didn't silo everyone and make them feel very isolated and, alone? I haven't ever seen it done before. And so how was your first event received? Like that first get together locally?
It wasn't like a huge hit, like truthfully. Like we had good intentions and we had good initial feedback, but obviously you got some really difficult schedules to be able to make like this to be a huge, like a win-win for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And so despite it being a very small like show,
I felt like the mentality behind it was more of what made other residents reach out. Just because our hospital is a very unique situation in the fact that like a lot of our residency programs are in one building. So we're kind of we always joke and call it like the mothership, but we're kind of at the like main hospital location. So we have, general surgeons and anesthesiologists and OBGYNs, family med, internal med, cardiology fellows. So tons and tons of residents and fellows that are kind of all in that same building that pass each other every day, that have no idea who is who. And so I think just even sending out a picture of our family and saying, hey, we're here. We want to open up our home or at least our like lives to be supportive to whoever is here. Please like reach out even if you can't come. I think that has changed just the mentality of like, now there's residents saying, oh, hey, yeah, you're the one who sent us that email. Hey, I just wanted to say thank you so much. My wife and I couldn't come, but it made me feel really great to know that there was someone else who had a spouse that lived here and that were going through something similar to us. So I feel like sometimes it's just also highlighting that like there are people similar to you also going through this journey that just gives you that like little burst of like reassurance that like, wow, okay, we're not in it alone. There's other people doing it too. Sometimes that in and of itself can just be super helpful.
Yeah. Even if the show out isn't always a huge hit.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like just knowing that there's somebody out there in solidarity, I think that that's very comforting for a lot of us. And exactly, it's just like knowing that there's somebody else, maybe even in the same hospital, who shares the same values as you do. And I know that like in my residency experience, that was very isolating for me. And I definitely, 5 years is a long time to feel like, there's kind of a values misalignment here.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think about the chat, like obviously you're well aware of just like the depression rates and amongst residents and the self-medication that happens amongst residents and like the divorce rates that happen amongst those in medicine. And like, there's so many layers to all that's going on that just weighs on like the mental aspect of what not only the physicians are going through, but then how that is then the weight that the partner carries and then what they're holding together at home to try and balance. And like all of that are just ways that we're trying to kind of shed some light to and just have an extended helping hand, because like what you just described, like it's a very multifaceted, like you as doctors have a very multifaceted, multi-complex, like persona, depending on who you have to talk to and what you're dealing with and how that comes across, like that we as partners are all having to navigate. So finding that community on both sides is like things that we care about.
Totally. And you guys, of course, you do talk so much about community, and like you have truly, in every sense, you've gone out on a limb. You guys put yourself out there in a very big way. And so may I ask, I'm just intrigued to know, are you guys extroverts? Is anyone an introvert here? I mean, like you guys really, you took that step. You offered the olive branch to everyone.
It's so weird putting your life out on social media. I mean, we've, I don't know how you feel about it. I feel like I've come to just kind of like, this is just now like a normal thing.
I'm definitely probably more of the like introvert, like publicly. I tend to be like a little bit more shy and a little bit more reserved when it comes to that. But I think the big thing is like within medicine, even in medical school, like I always had a really big passion and heart for like trying to make people feel included, trying to make people, you know, feel a part, like really worked to like, you know, organize things within my own medical school for like mental health resources and things like that, because I just never wanted somebody to feel like there wasn't somebody in their corner. And so I feel like, yes, I'm probably a little bit more on the introverted side at like baseline, but I feel like when it comes to making sure that somebody feels like they're a part of the team and that they have somebody there that's with them, that's where I'm kind of mentally and emotionally able to kind of put myself out on a limb to be like, if this helps one person, or if this makes a difference for one medical student or for one resident to be like, wow, somebody gets me and I'm not by myself in this, then okay, then we'll kind of figure out how to like push me out of my comfort zone and make me do things that I'm probably not as comfortable with. But I think for me, like that is what fuels it. Just knowing that there's, you know, avenues and areas where I can really, you know, be an encouragement to other people and help them feel like there's someone in their corner. Because residency, like you said, it's super isolating. Like even if you're in a program of 20 people, that's still, you know, 20 people who are operating and living their lives very differently and doing different rotations and different blocks and different services, and you're operating with different attendings all of the time. And so it's kind of this, you know, very inconsistent kind of community. Even though you know these people, it's very hard sometimes to feel like it's as close and as intentional as you want. And so it's, how do we do that? Okay, sure. That means that I have to kind of take a step, you know, out a little bit more and be that little bit more of an extrovert. Then okay, we can do it.
You're so right. And it's like shifting sands, because the nature of how graduate medical education is set up is that you're never going to be comfortable. If it's like your second or third month on a rotation and you finally feel like, okay, I have a little groove, I have a little routine. Okay, you're off that rotation now. So, you know, start back, maybe not at square one every time, but you're going to start back at one of the early squares. Like that is continuously what it feels like, because as we grow and we get more comfortable with X or Y or Z, like, okay, now you're really nailing the duties of a PGY3, and maybe you were killing it on that last rotation. Well, guess what? Now you have the responsibilities of a 4 and you're on a PGY4 level rotation. And it's like the difficulty level really does grow with us, maybe in a way where not all industries require that of their, you know, team members.
Yeah, I feel like it's definitely that tiered approach where it's just when you feel like you're comfortable enough and you kind of have a little bit of your bearings, then things change and you kind of have to start over from square one again. And I feel like I see that and have seen that now in myself each year as I'm transitioning into different kind of roles and seats, and what I'm seeing now in other residents as they're coming behind me. And so I feel like those are the times where you have to speak into those people even more to be like, hey, I know that this transition is hard. I remember exactly how I felt. Like November is notorious for being one of the hardest months in OBGYN residency, especially. At least I feel that way, because our hours are longer. It's getting darker earlier. And so it feels like you're not seeing any sunlight at all. It's freezing cold in Pennsylvania. And so it's just kind of one of those months where you're like, wow, okay, this just kind of sucks, because you've been in your year for long enough for it to supposedly be comfortable and you should kind of know what you're doing, but it's still not really long enough for you to definitely feel completely confident. And so those are the months where I feel like people like lean in on each other even more so to be like, hey, I remember what this transition was like. This is how I got through it. Or like, these are ways I found, you know, life to, ways to balance life outside of all of this. And, but it definitely, man, each year you kind of have to figure out like how to pivot again to kind of figure out where to start.
Yeah, it keeps you on your toes for sure. Do you guys have any like quick hitter, any more like communication or relationship prioritization kind of tips, especially those that can help people kind of who maybe, they are sleepwalking through it, like their ship's passing in the night? How can we jolt ourselves out of those types of ruts, which inevitably happen to all of us, and like get intentional again?
So I think the biggest thing is I always kind of think about this from two different aspects. I think about it more from a kind of relational aspect of like, how do you interact with your partner, your spouse? And then how do you interact with how you communicate and approach this with your kids? Because we have had to navigate both now, which has been an exciting transition, but it still has carried a lot of stress and adjustment with it as well. I would say for Chris and I, it was, how do we prioritize those small conversations to set expectations? How do we say, okay, what can we do today to kind of either fix it, vent about it, or just completely move on? And I think kind of setting that tone when you first come home, I think really helps take the pressure off of you as someone who's been kind of mentally spent at work all day, to feel like you have to come home and explain why you feel a certain way, versus it just being like, hey, what you're feeling is totally valid and okay, but you don't even have to say anything about it. Like, we can go on and watch TV or cook dinner or do whatever, and it be okay. And so I think that has been the biggest thing for us. I think as a parent, we had a huge learning curve as well, learning that we didn't have to do every single thing together with our son. When we first had our little boy, it was, okay, well, if one person's going to wake up, both people have to wake up because we're in this together and we're going to do everything together. And I think we quickly realized that's not sustainable either. Like, yes, we want to support each other and we want to be there to encourage one another, but also like, people have to sleep, you have to work, I have to operate, and we can't do that if we're super sleep deprived. So I feel like we've also carved out ways to protect time and set up safeguards to where it's, if Chris is absolutely overwhelmed, like, we have like safe words and phrases in our family to be like, I need a minute, and no questions asked, I take Emmett, he's out of the house, and we just have a break. And we set up, time when I'm on call, that Chris kind of has either a nanny that sometimes comes in, or a next door neighbors will occasionally watch our little boy for a few hours, or he'll get to take him to Chick-fil-A and go for a run and do those things to kind of get out of the house and have balance. And then when I'm not on call and I'm at home, there's weekends where I take Emmett by myself for a morning, and I do a mommy and Emmett date morning, and we go out to Target because that's our favorite. And we go out to eat breakfast, and we get cake pops and Starbucks, and we do that. But it gives Chris a moment to just have 4 hours to just go play golf or go, to the gym, or just have a chance to just kind of feel like he can get a break. And so I think we've had to communicate like, hey, we need that space. We need time alone, because I feel often that I'm missing out on time with him. And so it's, instead of trying to divide up time between mom and dad, like, you get undivided time with Emmett. And then that also, I think, helps create safeguards in place to make sure that Chris isn't getting burnt out, that he has support, and that I prioritize that he needs time for himself too. Like, if he can't take care of himself and he can't go run for 20 minutes or go get a haircut, like, what am I really doing to support him? And so we've like had to communicate through that, but I think it's been super helpful in a way that I would encourage other people is like, yes, you want to spend all of your free time together as a family because your free time is very, few and far between, but at the same time, you also want quality time. And sometimes that involves being able to give somebody a much needed break. And for you to get that undivided time with your child that you are also craving because you haven't gotten it as much because of your work schedule.
Yeah. The only things that I would add, like, I'd put a huge value and emphasis on like eating healthy, nutritious foods, because that fuels your body and mind for life, and doing that. And then like making time to exercise. I think that's something that is so quick to go, just because of just how busy we can be. But I think that we can scroll 20 minutes less on our phones and do a 20-minute YouTube exercise at our home if you don't have time to go to the gym itself. There's so many different ways that we can actually do right by our bodies, which then feeds our mind, because it's like, first year, we could save this for another episode, but just like I experienced a ton of depression at different seasons of residency. And that has been a huge way that I've been able to overcome. Not do you ever overcome, like we're always a work in progress, but like that's been a huge way that we've been able to work through all of that, was thinking about what does our diet look like? What am I eating? And then how does that enable her as we meal prep and everything else that we do, to say that, hey, taking care of our like body, soul, and mind, so that we can actually give people what they need, versus just running on empty all day long. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you guys are just wise beyond your years, because you don't look very old. I have to guess, you're very wise beyond your years. What I think is so impactful about what you're sharing is that people need to hear, social media is a highlight reel. We all know that, but like, do we really internalize it? Do we really, really know it? Because I think that the way that you lay out these thought processes and all of the systems that you have in place in your life, it just really helps show all the deliberate thought that goes into that. Because again, no couple, no person's perfect and just wakes up and maybe gets it all magically right with putting no effort into it, right? That would not be the right message for anyone to take from like social media. They're like, yeah, that's crazy. This couple just has it on lockdown, and like they make it look easy. And because they make it look easy, I assume it is really easy and they don't have to put thought towards it.
Yeah. And I feel like, we by no means have it all figured out. We by no means are perfect at it. There are times that we will have the conversation, be like, wow, I really feel like I suck as a wife or as a mother right now, or I really feel like I'm failing at work, or that I'm not providing in the way that you all need. And so those conversations happen, and we welcome them, because it means that we're trying and that we're, prioritizing the way that each of us views the emotions and perspectives of the other person. But I always tell people this at residency too. If you are just making an effort, that is the first step. So if you are conscientiously trying to say, like, I'm going to prioritize this because it's important. So like, it is important to me to be a very good resident, but it's also just as important to me to be a very good wife and to be a very good mother and a friend and a daughter and all of the other things in between. So in the same way that I would be super intentional about making sure that I am the best OBGYN for that patient in front of me, how is it any different for me to not give a small portion of my energy to try and do that in other ways and aspects of my life? And so, sometimes that means, and when we do this monthly, we sit down and just like have a family meeting, and we just like, while our son's napping, we just sit down and say like, okay, what are the goals? Like, how do we feel like we're doing? Where are we at right now on a scale of 1 to 10? Like, where are we at as a couple? Where are we at with our communication? Where are we at like with friends and as the parents? Like, let's be honest. And sometimes it's threes. And like, we have very open and honest conversations. And sometimes it's not, and it's much higher. And those are the times where we're like, heck yeah, we're killing it. But I think being able to have those like very open conversations, to be like, this isn't because we aren't on the same team or because we don't want the same things. It's just because like we want the best for each other and for our family and for like this little life that we're building. Yeah. So like, how do we make it better? Like, how do we get to a 10 is always how we kind of phrase it. Like, what do we need to change, or what do we need to prioritize to try and get us there? And that would be like my encouragement to everyone, is like, try and figure out like where you're at in your life, and like think about conscientious ways of like, okay, I feel like I'm a 4 right now in my relationship with my family or with my co-residents or whatever. And it's like, conscientiously like write down ways that you can like get yourself to a 10. And it doesn't mean you're ever going to get to a 10. We've never been at a 10. But I think the thought process behind it, when you're being intentional to kind of figure out like ways to specifically target those areas, that you really then later look back and be like, wow, look how much growth we've actually had. Yeah. And like, it's been fun and it's been enjoyable, and it's still been just as hard. But it doesn't mean that it can't be done either.
That's why I said at the beginning of the show, even when you introed, like, we want our love to be easy to see, not because we're perfect by any means, but it's just because when you start applying some of those things over and over again, you do look different than other people around you because of the effort that you're making to care. And it's not a diss to anyone else. It's just something that we conscientiously like want to do for ourselves and for each other. So that's why like love is such a big deal to us, not like our own like emotional, physical love. It's just the love that, you know, we want to share for the world needs more love. So it's like, can we not, how can we be a part of making that a reality for others to feel?
And if people feel like just a little bit of that with a fun video of a 2-year-old on social media, or like with a fun video to be like, hey, this is a 2-year-old and us exercising. Like, this is how we prioritize like doing fun things as a family. Like, we need more of that. We need more of just like, things can be positive. Like, there can be good things in difficult seasons, and it doesn't change the season. Residency is still going to be just as hard. Mm-hmm. You know, it doesn't change like that transition that we're going to be facing into attending hood soon. Mm-hmm. Like, that's going to be just as hard, if not harder. But it's like, how do we still find joy in those moments? How do we still find purpose in those moments? And how do we like still dance in the kitchen and laugh with our 2-year-old and like enjoy the fact that like we've been given this day and, you know, make the most of it?
Yeah.
Well, that's very beautifully said. You know, I absolutely could not say it better myself. And I think a very moving note to end on. So Chris and Hannah, I want to thank you both so much for sharing your story and insights with us today. I think that a lot of listeners are going to feel very seen and inspired by what you've shared. Where can our listeners find and connect with you online?
Yeah, so you can find a lot of our social content on Instagram. And so that's at the Otherside Med. And then we also have a website called OthersideMed.com, which is a place that we're about to begin starting to highlight other stories of our of our audience. And so many of people have begun writing some of their own stories in medicine and what their life looks like as a family and whatnot, to help. Well, everything we just described, you're not just going to hear from us, you're going to hear it from other people like us and like yourself. So you can check out the website, and then you can subscribe to our monthly newsletter if you just want to hear updates around partnerships or tips or podcasts like this that we're going to be on that we can then share to be listening to. You can access that both through Instagram and the website.
Awesome. We'll be sure to link those in our show notes. So please check them out. Follow me on Instagram at francismay.md and at Rethinking Residency. Visit my website, rethinkingresidency.com, to learn more about resident physician stories and ways that residents can most effectively navigate the game of residency. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Promising Young Surgeon. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. And if you'd like to submit any questions for future episodes, email me at pys@heyinfluent.com.